Hi everybody. In this video, I'm going to show you how to control visuals in Hydra using the MIDI CC function in Sonic Pi. So we are going to be playing around with Hydra today. If you don't know what Hydra is a live coding visual language. It was developed by Olivia Jack. This is not going to be a tutorial about how to really use Hydra. There is going to be some assumption that you know your way around Hydra a little bit. If not, there's a lot of great resources out there for you to check out, but this will not be a Hydra tutorial in that sense. What we're going to be talking about is how can we control these visuals in Hydra using webMidi and sending MIDI messages from Sonic Pi into Hydra so that we can control the visuals in Hydra through Sonic Pi and then add a little music to get them synced and coordinated. So first thing I'm going to do here, this is the Hydra website. I've also included the link here. I'll throw it in the comments. So hydra.ojac.xyz. This is the web version of Hydra. So usually you go to this website and it'll give you a just sort of starter version of something that somebody made. I am going to right now just delete that, and I'm going to start with a very simple shape, and then specifically a triangle. So it's very simple. So here we have our shape, okay? So now, to get Hydra communicating with Sonic Pi, or more specifically what's happening is Hydra is just going to be listening for any web MIDI messages that are sent. So any MIDI messages sent its way. Now, in order to do that, we are looking at this script here. This is on Olivia Jack's GitHub in Hydra Standalone. I will post a link to this specific script here in the comments as well. So this is what we want. All this information is what we need in order to get these two communicating. I'm not going to go into the specifics about this, but just know that this is what we need. So we're going to copy this and then go back here to Hydra, and then we need to open up our console. Now bear in mind, I am using Chrome in order to do this. I have tested this on Firefox and it also seemed to work, but I would recommend using Chrome as the web browser to do this. So we're gonna right click and go to inspect, and that's going to open up our console here, and we're going to go to console. Okay, this is a bunch of information that just pops up when we go to the Hydra website. So now here in the console, I'm just going to paste that script that accesses the webMidi right here in the console, okay? Now, one thing I'm going to point out before I do that, and I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here. There's this line here, the second to last line, in which we are converting something from one of the arrays that we get into, it says here, we're going to normalize CC values from 0 to 1. Now, the reason this is here is because if you're familiar with Hydra, a lot of the arguments and parameters that functions take are often between 0 and 1. Now, when we're sending these MIDI CC values, those are going to generally be numbers between 0 and 127 is the range that we are allowed to send when using those. But I personally am not going to have this line here. I don't want my values normalized between 0 and 1. I'm going to make that decision and do that in my code in Sonic Pi and in Hydra if I need to do a value between 0 and 1. So I'm going to assume the values I can send will be between 0 and 127. So I'm going to delete all of this except for this ARR square bracket to square bracket. So this is in reference to an array. Again, I'm not going to get too deep into what all this stuff means. We're just going to assume this is what we need. But right now, I've just converted this line to just have this variable except ARR 2. So now I'm just going to press enter. And then you see here, it did this console.log that is available, assuming everything worked out. You may get an error message, hopefully not, but this is now what we are working with. So I'm going to go ahead and close this console now. Be aware if you ever have to refresh or do anything, then you do need to repaste and enter that script into the console. All right, so now let's jump over here to Sonic Pi. So I'm going to create a live loop. I'm just going to call it mid1. And then I'm going to do the MIDI underscore CC command here. Now, MIDI CC, I set this up here. Here it is in the documentation. What we need to provide it with is a control number, which is going to be the channel that it's going to be sent to, so it can identify which MIDI message it's receiving, and then we're going to provide it with a value. So I'm going to just start out with MIDI CC 0. And then I'm just going to send a value of 4. Now, since this is a live loop, it's going to need a sleep, so I'm going to do sleep 1. Okay, now I'm going to run this. I'll make sure code here is running and my code here is running. Okay, now nothing's really happening yet, and the reason being is I don't have anything in my Hydra code to accept this. So what now I need to do is I'm going to do open close parentheses, the arrow function, and then CC square bracket 0 close square bracket. So this is just a way in Hydra that we can accept incoming variables and have those variables change on a consistent basis instead of just when we start up the program. And this now is saying I want from the 0 channel of the MIDI CC. And now if I update this, you see that my triangle became a square. And now this is running over in Hydra. I'll jump back to Sonic Pi, change it, and then you see it turns back to that. So now what I could do is I'm going to make a ring 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 dot tick. And then I'm going to run code here, and then hopefully every beat you will now can see that the shape changes. So that's basically it. That's a basic idea here. So again, I'm just using this MIDI CC. I set the channel, and then I use this parentheses and arrow function to CC, and then this number here has to match whatever I'm doing here, all right? But I'm going to go a little bit further so you can see what else. So I'm going to make a second live loop. We'll call this mid2. I'm going to sync it with mid1. And I'm going to do another MIDI CC. This time I'm going to send it to channel 1. And this time I want to change the shape of, I'm sorry, I want to change the size of the shape, okay? Now, the size of the shape is going to be a value between 0 and 1. So the way that works here in Hydra is the second argument of the shape is a number between 0 and 1. So if I make it like 0.1, it's going to make it small. If I make it 0.7, it's going to make it much bigger. So I want to be sending now these decimal point numbers, okay? Now, first thing is I can't just go something like, you know, the rand function, which, if you know, sends a random value between 0 and 1 using floating point numbers. So if I do that, I'm gonna, well, first I'm gonna get an error because I need that to sleep. And I was gonna do maybe like make it change shape fairly consistently. But the problem is that, as I said, and we can even go here and take a look back at the documentation of the MIDI CC, and it says that any random value or any floating point numbers are going to be rounded up. So if it's like 3.5, it'll go to 4. If it's 3.4, it'll go to 3. So it's always going to round up numbers. It doesn't take floating point. However, if we do want to pass floating point numbers, we can by using this val underscore f option, and then it will convert those floating point numbers into values between 0 and 127, which is what's going to be understood as we send them through here. So now what I'll do is val underscore f, and now this will send values between 0 and 1. it will then convert it to 0 to 127, which will then be understood in here. So before I do that, I need to make another one of these to say that it is accepting from this value here. And now if I do it, I'll update it here. Update it here, and we get this big white washout. Why did this happen? So now the problem is I'm sending these 0 to 1 values from my MIDI CC. Now this val f is converting those into 1 between 0 and 127. So when this is receiving it, it's receiving values between 0 and 127. Now this is why in the script, I'll jump back here for a second, this line here is kind of doing that conversion for us. It's normalizing the values between 0 and 1. But I didn't want to do that because I want to be able to send like 3, 4, 5, 6 so I can change the kind of shape I have, but I will also need to do some of these floating points. So what I'm going to do in my Hydra code instead is I'm just going to say divided by 127. And then if I run it, now that takes care of that problem. So now you can see with these two things here, I have, I'm sending these random numbers between 0 and 1, which are getting converted, and then I'm converting them back by doing this, and that's changing the shape. And then I'm changing what kind of shape it is through this one here. So that is how we can then manage to send both regular values between 0 and 127, and if we want to do the between 0 and 1, we can send these floating point numbers here. One thing you do have to bear in mind, though, is that you can't use negative numbers, and there are instances in Hydra where you can use negative numbers, and that might change directions or things like that. But that is something you would just have to manually change in your Hydra code. So I'm just going to play around a little bit more, just show you what some other options are here. Another thing, I'm going to kind of modify the range of these here for a second between maybe like 0.2 and 0.7, just because sometimes they get a little bit big. I'll shrink this down slightly, and then I'll run that. And no, I don't always have to update my Hydra code when I update my Sonic Pi code, as long as everything is staying the same here. So next I'm going to do another one here. So MIDI 3, I'm going to sync with mid 1. And this one I'm going to do 2 actually. So I'm going to do 1 here, and I'm going to do a random integer range between 2 and maybe 7. And I'm going to do the exact same thing, but I'm going to do this to 3. And I'm going to have this one just change every 2 beats, right? Now, what I want to do in my Hydra code here is I'm going to do a repeat, which is going to give me kind of a grid of these shapes. So I have to do my arrow function. So one of them is going to be from CC2, and then one of them is going to be from CC3. So now, if I run this happened last time too. Let me rerun this. There we go. All right, so now I got these grids changing here through MIDI 1 and 2. The 2 is the X, the number of shapes I see from left to right on the x-axis, and MIDI 3 is changing the number of shapes I'm going from top to bottom. That's what the repeat does. And one more, I feel like we need a little color here. So I'm now going to do one with some color, and I'll do that on MIDI CC4. There are 127 MIDI CC channels that you can send through, so it gives you a ton of options, probably that you would not necessarily use. This one I'm also gonna need a floating point value between 0 and 1, and let's do 0.5. So I'm just trying to do each one at a different one, and this one I'm gonna sneak in here something called Colorama, and this takes a value between 0 and 1, and this is CC4. So I update this, and then update, here we go, up. And so I'm seeing not the effect I'm expecting. Why? Because again, I'm sending a random floating point number between 0 and 1, but if I am going to receive that on the Hydra end, I just need to divide this by 127. And there, that is the effect I was looking for. So now I have this interesting visual sort of thing going on here. Now, this is all just being controlled in Sonic Pi, but since this is Sonic Pi, it would make sense for me to throw in a little sound to kind of correspond with these visuals, and that is where you can really start having fun, is where you start live coding both your visuals, which are being affected through Hydra, that are controlled here in Sonic Pi, but then you can also add sounds in all of these loops that will correspond with the changes here. So I'm going to do a quick little thing here. So I'm gonna do just like a little noise to make myself a hi-hat sound. So I'll just do play 60 and do release. I'll start. So just to be clear here, I'm gonna maybe change this to this. Yeah, I like that a little better. So just to remind us here, and maybe I'll even do some comments, this is the shape size. So what you're hearing now is corresponding with shape size. I think here I'm gonna do just a nice kick drum here. And this one is being changed the color. Here, this is the shape itself. And I think here I'm going to do a little bass. Let's see, let's do a ring. Since I'm doing a dot tick here, I'm going to change this to dot look. can see now the possibilities going on with that. From there, I could start playing around with the values that are going to Hydra. I could add some more stuff in Hydra. I could add some more loops and change some more stuff. So this method I find very effective and opens up so many different possibilities for live coding, both in Hydra and in Sonic Pi, and being able to kind of have some control over your visuals and have them correspond with the music that you're doing in a pretty easy and helpful way. So that is all for this tutorial. Hopefully you learned a bit. Again, I'll post the link to the Hydra script we need to put in the console, the link to Hydra here, and yeah, hope you enjoyed it.